It's July 22nd, 2021. This is Roqe. If it was not enough of a challenge to grow up as one of the few Persian kids in the red state American South of the 80s and 90s, how about adding to that being non-binary and queer long before those terms and LGBTQ people were widely accepted? Kayvon Zand faced all of that and the added layer of Iranian community attitudes and being different from the social stereotype of quote-unquote normal. But Kayvon has emerged with strength as a provocative and stylish musical performer and has a big social media following to boot. Kayvon Zand joins us today to speak truth and to discuss the realities of growing up Persian and queer. This is Conversations from, to, and about the Iranian diaspora. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode 129 of Roqe. Hope you are keeping well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Salam dostan aziz, durud, mizun, khub, ali. That's all I know. It's the list of words that I say each time. Salam, hello to you from Toronto, Canada. I'm Jian. There's Captain Reza.
Hello, sir.
Khubi.
Khil.
That's the way I normally speak to Shaya.
Yes. I know, I was trying to imitate Shaya.
Yeah, you did a very good job. And Groovy Shaya, hello.
Hello, sir.
Good one.
The worst impression of Reza. Hello, sir. Kian is away today. She got her second dose of Pfizer. And did I say Pfizer?
You
Pfizer.
did say Pfizer.
Yeah. Pfizer. A close relation to Pfizer. And she, I guess she's suffering the side effects.
Yeah.
So she says anyway. Might be out for a drink somewhere. Probably. We are, so we miss you, Kian. We are get well or enjoy your vaccination. I don't know. We're coming to you on roqemedia.com. It is there that you can link to all of our platforms. Roqemedia.com is the site that the handiwork of Ponta the artist on our team. We are on our ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. We are coming to you on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and CastBox. If you'd like to see some visuals with Roqe and see us on social media, switch over to YouTube or Instagram right now, Roqe Media. And if you like your Roqe descriptions and bulletins in English and in Persian, check us out on Telegram. Kayvon Zand coming up today in just a few moments. Very unique and provocative performer and artist, and as well as being an important voice as a non-binary and queer member of our diaspora. Kayvon has a huge social media following and this really engaging story of growing up in North Carolina as a self-proclaimed Persian redneck and now having a family and kids, as well as continuing to be a nightlife personality and musician. Kayvon Zand joining us from Jersey City in the United States in just a few minutes. Hey, so before we really get into this program today, I just want to say a quick word, and I know we all did, to want to mention this about our thoughts with the people of Iran right now. And particularly the people of the Khuzestan region of Iran in the south, where, as some of you listening may know, you guys certainly know, some of my lineage comes from. And the news emerging from Khuzestan is, like so much of the news we've had to endure from Iran in recent years, it's heartbreaking and it's infuriating. Like in this case, a completely bungled water supply system that has left folks without drinking water and resources. I mean, the basic human needs. And then when some have raised their voice to protest or say, hey, come on, we need something done about this. There's been this government crackdown so harsh that it has, again, led to innocent lives being taken away for nothing. More brutality from this current regime. And I know we're working on doing an episode next week focusing on the roots of this situation in Khuzestan, but for now our thoughts are certainly with the folks in Iran in the middle of another tragic circumstance.
Khuzestani people, they've been on the front line of the war with Iraq for 8 years, and after that nobody cares about them. It's really heartbreaking. I went there several times and it's a really beautiful land, but now it's like a dry and it's unbelievable. And it's not only Khuzestan, Sistan, Baluchistan, and gradually the water crisis take over all Iran.
Yeah, it's crazy. Right after I grew up in Shiraz. I've never actually visited Khuzestan, but the neighborhood I was raised in, I grew up in, is an Abadani neighborhood. Because right after the war with Iraq, a lot of people from Bourdain and Khuzestan migrated to Shiraz. So I'm culturally, I feel very much connected to people of Khuzestan. And this news is, it could not have been more heartbreaking. Shaya is right to add to what he said. After the war, they've never. It's things have been getting progressively worse for people of the South.
That's intra-Iran issues. It's also, you think about the rest of the world, and I know there's been a lot of memes and things being put in social media, but the world correctly focused on something like the George Floyd killing, and then you sort of wonder where the world is when this type of thing is happening. It's Iranians posting on social media to a certain extent, but where's the rest of the world? Do they know about this? Are they watching? There's no nuance here. It's total brutality that is unfathomable. It's funny, the things you remember. Sometimes if you don't have direct memories, you remember feelings or sensations as a kid. So Bourdain has an airport, right?
Yes.
So when I was a little kid, I visited Iran. This is in the 70s. I was this little kid, and I was 5 years old, before revolution, obviously. We had gone to Tehran, and for some reason our plane had to stop in Bourdain before it went, when we were leaving. And that's where my dad was born, And the one thing I remember about Bourdain is the plane doors opened, and it was so hot. Like it was this wash of heat hit me, and I'll never forget that sensation. I don't remember details of some of my extended family's homes at that time, but I remember the heat of Bourdain.
Before revolution, a lot of great musicians played in Bourdain because some oil company was there, and like Dave Brubeck played in Bourdain.
Oh wow!
Duke Ellington played in Bourdain, and it's really.
Did Duke Ellington play there, or just Duke Eglinton?
No, Ellington. Sorry, Eglinton is the
Eglinton subway station in Toronto.
Sorry.
That's named after him. Yes. Anyway, we can't possibly do it justice. We're going to try and with these few words, but we'll try and see if we can have a proper conversation next week. And we're working on a couple of folks who know about this history of the water system. First of all, we've had Kayvon Madani on the show, and maybe he can come back on to talk about how this whole situation. The dysfunction in Iran at the roots of how these situations happen. That is connected to mismanagement and outright bad practices by the government. So we'll get to all that. Hey, in the coming days on Roqe, I should mention some of the guests we have coming on. Dr. Sheila Nazarian.
Yes.
The celebrity plastic surgeon. Saying celebrity plastic surgeon kind of undermines her, because she actually does amazing work in terms of reconstructing, helping people who've, for various reasons other than, simply I want to look hotter on my Instagram, are getting reconstructive surgery done or plastic surgery done or something. She has this Netflix series called Skin Decision, Before or After, for which she was nominated for an Emmy Award. So Sheila Nazarian coming up. Hamid Saidi of the group Opium Moon, the Grammy Award winning group. The great, do you know what instrument he plays, Reza?
No.
Do you want to take a guess?
Saxophone.
The great Persian instrument, the saxophone. If I were to say he's a Persian, kind of a master of his
Santur?
That's right.
Yeah.
He's a
Oh, my
santur
mom
player.
plays the santur.
Well, then hopefully she'll tune into this episode. I don't know how much your
That's so
family
exciting.
listens. They're ashamed of you. Hamid Saidi, he's part of this group called Opium Moon. They won their debut album came out in 2019, and they promptly won a Grammy Award for it in the, I guess, best world music category or something like that. And he's this santur player, and they have a couple of new records coming out, and he has a new record out. So we'll talk to him. And Ali Parsa. Ali Parsa is a British Iranian, Dr. Ali Parsa, PhD in engineering and physics, and he's been an investment banker. He's in the healthcare space now, but he's developed this company called Babylon Health, which Babylon Hell, it's Babylon Health, which at the forefront of it has it's an app where you can remotely consult with medical professionals rather than having to go into a doctor's office, which it helps people in all kinds of ways. Now, he developed this and launched this in 2014. It was already a successful product.
Wow.
But then think about this.
COVID.
A pandemic hits, and it becomes what everybody needs. So he has just been added to the list in the UK. The Sunday Times of the UK has added him to the list of the top 200 wealthiest people in the UK. He's a billionaire a couple times over, but doing really interesting work and an incredible story. You know, every time you read about Dr. Ali Parsa, the headline is always something like, the refugee kid who became a billionaire, because he escaped from Iran post-revolution as a 16-year-old, left the family behind. I think he walked over the border in Pakistan or something like that, came to England with nothing, even though he came from a middle-class family, he didn't have anything with him. So it's quite a story, the story of Dr. Ali Parsa, and I very much look forward to having him on the show.
Yeah, I mean, if Kian was here, she probably would say, the
yeah.
rich people.
She'd be like, ooh, a billionaire, huh? Didn't hear anything else.
Kian cannot speak for herself right now. She is deathly ill from taking vaccines.
We love you, Kian.
We do love you,
We
Kian.
love you, Kian.
Hey, I should mention for this episode a big shout out to Farid Amerioun and York National Realty for helping us to bring this episode of Roqe to your ears and eyes. York National Realty is a boutique real estate company based in Aurora, Ontario, Canada, that provides top-tier service with its team of Farid, Sean Fadavi, and Nahal Sultani. They're a full-service realty firm that are there for everyone from first-time home buyers to investors looking for new opportunities in the communities they serve. Farid and his team have also made it their mission to give back to the Iranian community in the diaspora and have supported a number of Persian community events and projects. And they wanted to support this episode of Roqe, along with Kayvon Zand, as they are proud supporters of the LGBTQ community. So thank you to Farid, Sean, and Nahal and York National Realty. Go to yorknational.com. That's yorknational.com. Thanks, you guys, for your support and for your support for the Persian community as well. Captain Reza, I saw a film last night. First of all, first time going to the movies.
Oh, nice.
And since, because, we've been in lockdown in Toronto, it's opened up. I mean, you wear the mask and everything. You eat the popcorn through the mask. No, you lift the mask. But it was called Roadrunner. It's a documentary about Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a perfect film. There's some issues I had with it, I don't know how they made a documentary about Anthony Bourdain without including my two interviews with Anthony Bourdain. It's a shame on them, really.
Put that on the editing table.
That's right, somewhere on the cutting room floor. No, it's a really moving documentary because I think Persians, in the last few years, since that 2014 episode of Parts Unknown where Anthony Bourdain went to Iran, and he spoke such truth about the people of Iran that Iranian representatives haven't been able to speak. I mean, I remember that episode when it aired. People were just sending it around to each other and calling each other, and they don't actually include that in the documentary. There's no Persian content in the documentary.
Nothing, huh?
But he had it's tragic because of course he's gone now and he took his own life. But it's really worth seeing. I think it's really worth
Check it
seeing
out.
for those fans of Anthony Bourdain out there. From the time that he was a chef and a former heroin addict who
Wow.
writes this expose kind of book called Kitchen Confidential, which becomes this massive hit, to his yen to start traveling and discovering cuisine cultures around the world. But really what he's doing is exposing and discovering cultures around the
Yeah.
world and bringing that back to people through documentaries that he would make. Anyway, check out the film Roadrunner if you're enjoying. I've got no stake in the film. I'm not promoting them because they're a sponsor, but Anthony Bourdain is not a sponsor of Roqe. But speaking of sponsoring, though, and supporting, we do this show, and we depend on you folks out there to crowdsource for this show. And it really makes the difference for us of being able to continue. So if you, I like to say it this way, if you're a regular listener of Roqe, I mean, if you listen to us more than 2 or 3 or 4 times, then we'd love you to become a patron. I mean, think of it as, you pay for your Netflix or you pay for your chewing gum, and then you can help support Roqe. It's roqemedia.com. You go to the little button up there that says support us, the red button, and for any amount, I mean, I think the minimum is $5, but it can be $10 or more than that a month. You become a patron, and that helps us to keep things going. We the whole team sees the list of who are our patrons, and we really appreciate you folks who have become patrons. So roqemedia.com, and press that button that says support us, right?
Yes.
All right, Captain Reza, Groovy Shaya. It's really not as much fun without Keon, is it?
I know.
Oh, yeah.
I
I'm
know.
stuck with you two. Stuck with a couple of mooks. I don't know what that means.
I love you too, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Shaya.
I mean the music band you too.
Oh, you like the
Oh,
band?
you
You
like-
too. Thank you. It's very funny.
I love
Shaya.
you
That's good.
too.
You're doing jokes in English now.
I love
Very
it.
good. Yeah. Okay, we'll see you guys on the back end of this interview. Let's get to our featured guest. Following Pride celebrations around the world last month, it seems a fair time to ask what life is like for LGBTQ people who are of Iranian background. How deep does homophobia continue to run in the Persian community? And notwithstanding the government inside Iran, is progress being made for Iranians in the diaspora? Well, my featured guest today is a genderqueer nightlife personality, actor, and musician based in New York City, known for eccentric live performances and parties, as well as their established personal style featuring extravagant blonde bouffants and Elvis Presley jumpsuits. Kayvon Zand was born to I don't know if he was burned or not. Kayvon Zand was born to Persian parents in Wilmington, North Carolina. In their teens, Kayvon worked as a fashion model, which allowed them to leave their hometown and travel in Europe. Kayvon is a self-taught pianist who also plays the violin and viola and creates 80s inspired electronic dance music that's quite compelling. They've released 2 EPs. In 2017, Kayvon launched Zandwagon, a model management and specialty casting company which represents individuals from a spectrum of ethnicities as well as transgender and cisgender people, filling a necessary void. Kayvon appeared on America's Got Talent Season 10, making it to judge cuts, and has been published in many periodicals, including Interview Magazine, Glamour Paris, Italian Vanity Fair, and the Huffington Post. Kayvon lives in Jersey City with their partner and 3 children. And right now, Kayvon Zand joins me from Jersey City, New Jersey today. Hello.
Hi, Jian John. I love saying that, Jian John. It has such a ring to it, all that zh.
It's not easy, is it?
No, it's actually very easy. That's what I love about it. And it sounds so bougie. Jian John.
Thank you, Kayvon John. I'm very happy to talk to you. You may be the first self-proclaimed Persian redneck we've had on the show. I mean, you certainly don't look like a stereotypical redneck now, but the moniker has to do with where you were born and grew up, right? Tell me about being a Persian kid in North Carolina.
I mean, I think you just nailed it. Persian redneck is really what it's about. I mean, here's the deal. I was born in the South, and so many Iranian people, were born in really cool cities, like Los Angeles or Toronto or, Hamburg or something like that. And the town that I'm from is called Wilmington, North Carolina. And I'm going to say it like that because it just seems so much more authentic for me. And what Wilmington, North Carolina is known for is being the home of where they filmed Dawson's Creek.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's actually a very beautiful place, but the climate, and I don't mean the weather. I mean the political climate. There was just not a place where someone like me could exist.
I was going to say the popular ethnic show, Dawson's Creek.
Which it's funny you say that because I was like like in my early teens, I was like an extra on like that show, like,
really?
popping up somewhere. Yeah, good times. But it's the Bible Belt, and growing up in a place that you are literally the minority, and I'm not talking about like gender orientation. I mean, just by when you came out, like just by birth, you were the minority. It was really a mindfuck. And I think what made it even more complex is that I have passing white privilege. So it was always a choice for me to speak on my Irani Bourdain, like, for example, like when I was a kid, that was a time where the whole Iraq thing, was just kind of like wrapping up and all of that. We're coming out of those crazy times.
The thing being the war? Is that what you mean?
Right. Like the whole, like down there, it's like people don't even understand the difference between Iran and Iraq. And this is during a time when people were saying Iraq, Iran, now it's a little bit more, fashionable to say it the correct way. But these are times where it was really a strange and lonely time because there weren't a lot of Persians around me. Like there were maybe like 4 other Persian families in my hometown. And one of those other Persian families is actually my dad's family, who disguised themselves to be not related to me. So that's a whole different soap opera. But it was really isolating because in school, I had a choice. I could fit in, I could blend in, I could be like the popular kid in so many ways, not just with my Irani Bourdain, but with my ethnicity, with my gender expression, and just really dial it back. But I didn't. And, looking back now, I'm proud that I really lived in my truth at such an early age, because coming from an Iranian background, that is not what you were taught to do. You were taught to live for, your neighbor, how you're perceived, خجالت هم ندین دیگه جلوی این ایرانی‌ها جلوی همسایه از این حرفا
Well, it's interesting. Sorry to cut you off. I mean, but
you're gonna have to cut me off. I talk a lot.
Well, noted. I'm figuring out the pacing. It's the first question. You are someone who falls into that category, and I think this is an interesting paradox or dilemma, or maybe an advantage that some Iranians have, which is that you, unlike me, someone who grew up with browner skin and a big nose, I mean, you could pass for Brad Pitt, or you could pass for a white guy, and so you say it's a choice, and yet we do want to live our authentic lives. And so did you find that, again, I mean, before we get into any sort of sexual or gender orientation, did you find that your parents or you were in the ethnic closet, or were you always out?
Well, here's the thing. It wasn't a choice for my mom to be in the ethnic closet because she talks like this, and this doesn't sound very white. Right. So for her, and let me just say, like, for the viewers and for you, how I deal with a lot of things that may be hurtful to me is humor. So if I'm making fun of myself or making fun of things, just bear with me, because It's a part of me kind of dipping my toes into this pool of this interview.
Gotcha.
But leaving that aside, and also we want to have fun, right? But leaving that aside, no, like my mom didn't really have the choice. My dad, my biological father, I wasn't raised with so let me just get this out of the way.
Yes,
so I was raised by my mom. I wasn't raised by my biological father. My mom remarried several times, but she wasn't married to my dad. She's not the typical Persian woman in this way. But my stepfather, I wasn't raised by him either. So when I reference my father, I'm talking about my biological father.
Who you knew, if I have this correct, you knew your father, but you didn't know he was your dad. Is that correct?
I found out like in my early teens that he was my father.
Right.
My mom kind of changed the narrative on who my father was, which was very difficult to deal with. But when I found out, I also found out that he knew, and I found out that it was a secret that was to be kept because, I guess both of them are doctors and well-known in their fields in this small town. So they wanted, to be perceived a certain way. And also my half-siblings didn't know that they had a half-brother that existed within their extended social circle. So, yeah, that's that Persian soap opera that I grew up in. Yeah, it's complicated. But to answer your question, my mom didn't have the option of white privilege because she came here, with an accent. Now the funny thing about her though is she didn't try to play white. She tried to be Italian. She's like, خب نگم ایرانی هستم بگیم Italian هستم دیگه چون که I talk like this so people might think I'm Italian. So she was always trying to say she was Italian and Greek, and she looks nothing like Italian or Greek. So that was funny. And my sister, who is my half sister that I grew up with, which is my stepdad's daughter, is very dark complected. Now keep in mind, like I like to go in the sun and tan. Like right now, this is tan for me. I'm actually even lighter than this naturally because my dad is from the north of Iran, so he has light eyes and very light skin. Mm-hmm. So even when I went to Iran several years ago with my half sister and my mom, people thought that my half sister was my wife. Now, granted, I wasn't dressed like this, but and they thought that I was English and that I was there through marriage to this woman. So they didn't even suspect me to be Iranian. So it's unusual. And also I'm tall, I'm 6'2", so that kind of threw it off even more.
I don't want to go too far into this rabbit hole because there's too much I want to talk to you about. But when you say the choice of white privilege, is it still white privilege? I mean, is white privilege only about looking white? I mean, can it still be white privilege if you grew up from the evil empire from with an Iranian background?
Yeah, I mean, white privilege would be me just not saying that I'm Iranian, just pretending like I'm. And white.
You could you could really get away with that.
Well, yeah. Also because I don't have a regional accent, so I don't sound foreign. So there's that too. So yeah, there is white privilege, and there's a lot of privilege that comes with that, especially when you grow up in the South. And there were times where I would say that I was Iranian, and people would call me a sand nigger.
All right, and so
just let's take a while to think about that. A sand nigger, like think about. I mean, you've probably never heard that phrase. That's what people in the South call people who are Middle Eastern.
Right. Yes, that's pretty horrendous. And how did you deal with that when you heard that?
I didn't know how to deal with it because I wasn't old enough to even understand that what the N-word meant, really. Outside of hearing it maybe in a song, I wasn't mature enough to fully comprehend it. Now looking back, it's more triggering, I think, than it was at the time.
So you would nevertheless tell people that you were. I mean, were there times? To be honest, I mean, this is called Roqe. The show. Were there times when you wouldn't tell people where you were from? I mean, I totally understand your mother. By the way, I would sometimes when I was growing up, people would say Jian, that sounds French, and I'd kind of like shrug, hoping that that's what they would think because I didn't want to get called a terrorist or whatever. Did you use your, as you say, white privilege at times and just not say where you were from?
No, I never did that, and I don't know why, because that would have made my life a lot easier as a kid. And I have to say, I think it's a lot different when let's be clear. It's not like everywhere you go, someone's going to say, where are you from?
Right.
Like this, or like they just assume. So these conversations were happening every day. Now, if you're somebody who is constantly being harassed because of your ethnicity or your cultural background, I can understand the temptation, and I wouldn't fault anyone for that because it's about survival. But that wasn't always the case. A lot of white privilege is I just blended in. I just blended in. If you ask people in grade school, like, how would you, and they would call me Kevin, they wouldn't call me Kayvon, which is more white privilege because my mom actually, on my birth certificate, called me Kevin. And at home, I was called Kayvon. I legally changed my name, actually, when I was old enough to, and I said, she's like, why did you do that? I'm like, because why would you call me Kevin? I'm like, I'm Kayvon, I'm Persian, I'm proud of my culture, I'm proud of who I am. I don't want to pretend to be someone I'm not. So it was a battle. And that battle of living my truth versus what would be more socially acceptable has always been there within, especially with my mom and my family. I've had to really prove myself and put my foot down about this.
It sounds like you had 1 foot in and 1 foot fortunately out in terms of perspective, but I'm glad that you told me about the Kevin and Kayvon story. I was wondering, I thought Kevin was the decision to no longer be Kevin was a gender-based thing, but then why would you be Kayvon? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So, so you were Kayvon, but Kevin was used to sort of as an assimilationist attempt, and then you chose to go back to Kayvon. It's very interesting. I mean, I think I dare say that if you were more identifiably a visible minority, maybe it wouldn't have been as easy for you to, maybe you would have embraced Kevin. Maybe you got lucky, in other words, and so you felt empowered more so than some of us did. Just while we're on the lexicon, in the introduction, I introduced you using they as the pronoun because you've said you're non-binary and genderqueer, but on your Instagram it says your pronouns are he and him. So what feels best for you?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because I'm grateful that we're having these conversations now. And, even several years ago, like the word non-binary and these types of words that are now more in vogue were not really used. And it was very difficult for me to really find my place because I didn't really feel like I was gay because I knew that I had an attraction to gender outside of the male gender. And also I knew that I wasn't just like a regular, dude. So there wasn't really like these terms that really gave an option for people who didn't fit in. It's like either you were like black or white. It's like there wasn't room for anything else. And that was really difficult for me because and these rabbit holes I take you down, but like in so many ways in my life, I just felt like I didn't really fit in because I like going back to what we saying with growing up, like, I didn't grow up in a strict Muslim home. There's a lot of Christianity around me. There was some Judaism around me. So I didn't feel like I was Muslim. I didn't feel like I was religious. So I didn't feel like I fit into the religious world. And the racial makeup, we know where I stand. So it was the same with my gender and my sexuality. Sticking to the point of non-binary, I do identify with non-binary now. I feel like that's the closest term that really makes sense of who I am. I can remember like just a few years ago, people were like, well, what are you? Are you you're a guy, but like, why do you like have like long hair, or why do you sometimes wear makeup, or why do you like wear clothes like that, oh, so that's so weird. And then like the gay community would be like, oh, why are you dating a woman? Are you trying to hide something? I'm like, look at me, don't look like I'm trying to hide anything. Like, does that even make sense?
Can't win.
No, and I was being like passed back and forth like this game of annoying ping pong that I never signed up for. So it just really sucked because once again I just felt like I didn't really fit in. And even though they don't like listen, like would you identify your full being as being straight? I'm just assuming. I don't know, and it's not my business. But I'm just saying, who is just defined by one thing? And that's what I don't like about some of this is that we see like people's sexual preferences before we see them as people if they're not straight people.
We all non-binary in some way, for sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, here's the deal with my gender association. If I'm with queer friends and I'm in a full look and I'm like I'm looking extremely feminine, and one of my friends, we're kikiing, kikiing. Let me just break it down for your audience. A kiki is when you're amongst queer friends and you're just having a good time. You're having a laugh. You're, it's like a mehuni. It's that type of thing. So
it's just like a mehuni. Yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So you're letting your hair down. You're listening to your gurus. You're having a good time. So that's a kiki amongst queer people. So if I'm around queer friends and I'm in a really feminine look and we're like, hey girl, we're using feminine pronouns, that's okay. Because I'm amongst family. I accept that. But if I'm out and a straight person like is calling me girl, that's a problem for me. And I know that may not make sense, but to me, usually when people who are not in the community are calling me girl, they're making fun of me.
Right.
For me, it's very cut and dry when it comes to my gender pronouns. I go by he, him. My children call me daddy. That is the most thing. But there are moments where I embrace the feminine, but that's not my everyday. And that's when I'm with community. And it has to feel right. I have to feel like I'm in a safe space. If I'm not in a safe space, I mean, it's just off limits.
I want to get to you being 17 years old and kissing a close friend of yours who happened to be a 24-year-old man. And at that point, thinking you were gay. Just before that, though,
How did you know how old you were? What type of resources do you have?
I do my research, honey.
I was, let's just say I was 18. Like, let's keep this. Okay. Before we
this is what you care. This is what you care about at this point. Retroactively worrying about.
Yes, of course. This is the internet. Bitch.
His liability.
This is cancel culture. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not trying to give problems for anybody. Let's just keep it where it's at.
All right. But before that, your ticket out of North Carolina, I understand, was being a male model. I assume the kind of model that you get pictures taken. And so you. and you went to Europe on a gig. I'm curious how that came about. Like you were scouted. Somebody saw you on the streets of North Carolina. How do you become a male model?
In North Carolina, right? Here, we're going to model for Walmart today. Get your gun out and get some Gatorade and let's get it going, boy. Yeah, right. Because remember Dawson's Creek, we're going to go back to this. Right. Actually, where I'm from is called the Hollywood of the South. First of all, thank you very much.
Who calls it that? The people of Wilmington, North Carolina, I assume.
Actually, no. You should Google it. Okay. Wilmington, North Carolina is a huge movie studio there.
Okay.
And a lot of your favorite films were filmed there. Are you a big fan of The Crow?
I've seen it. I don't know if I'm a big fan of The Crow, but yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, actually, all those were filmed there, and actually, that's where he was killed.
Oh,
when the gun went off in the movie studio, and they thought that happened there.
For some reason, I always thought Dawson's Creek was shot in BC. It was like a Canadian thing. I don't know why I thought.
Y'all Canadians always try to take credit for everything we do down here.
It's true, we do.
Y'all stay in your space. Let us do Dawson's Creek.
We're the Hollywood of the North. I mean, everyone wants to be the Hollywood, apparently.
Y'all are the Hollywood of the North. Let us do this. But yeah, no, Wilmington actually at the time was really doing a lot of movies, and it was more than The Crow, or Dawson's Creek, like so many, and I think they still are. So there are a couple talent agents out there, and for example, they would have big motion pictures with big stars. Like I grew up with like Katie Holmes, like walking around my town. It was weird, and people like that because we just had that type of thing going on there. Michelle Williams, So the thing is that when they have the smaller roles, the supporting roles, they would use local talent. It makes sense. Why would you spend money to fly out, Billy Bob from Oklahoma when Billy Bob is like literally in Wilmington? So with that said and done, there are talent agents. I was discovered by a local talent agent. And when I realized that I had the possibility of getting out of Wilmington, I doubled down. I'm like, yes, male modeling, wait, I can get out of Wilmington. Like, let's do this. I don't have to go to college. Let's do this. Because that was really being pushed down my throat to become a doctor and all that. And that just isn't me. So with that said and done, there was interest, and I started in London, and I was in Milan and Madrid for a full year. And then from there, I ended up in New York. And for me, I wasn't a successful male model, I say. Now, some people might think it was successful because I did some cool stuff and I got to live off of money that I made from this trade. But for me, it wasn't successful, I think, for two reasons. I think, one, I couldn't play the game. And the game was I couldn't tone myself down. I couldn't just be because at the time, you really had to look like a dude. Now it's not like all this androgyny and all this stuff going on. I wasn't having an easy time with going to castings and having to conform. They wanted me to cut my hair and do all the stuff that I didn't want to do. And I think also I learned that I'm more of an artist than someone who takes directions from artists. There's a difference. And I think when you're an artist, you have to be in your own space and be able to create. I think it's really hard to take direction and to conform when you're a true artist.
Sure.
We need great actors and great models, people who take direction. And that's a talent of its own, but that's just not me.
So, okay, so you come back to the States. Now let's get to the story of when you're 17, maybe 18. You ended up kissing a close friend of yours who was a 24-year-old man. You come out as gay at the time, and somehow your mom and sister find this out. They're trolling through your AOL account or something. Your mom at the moment did not react well. Now, since the pretext of this conversation is how the Persian community deals with LGBTQ issues and how where we're at in terms of homophobia and recognition and respect, it starts at the home. I'm curious what your experience was in the very beginning, when in that moment before non-binary, when you thought you were gay. What was the kind of conversation you had with your mom? What happened?
Well, I just want to make sure the timeline is correct. So I had this relationship before I did, I was still in it when I did
that was before the modeling.
Oh. So I didn't start modeling when I was 12 and then come back. Okay. So it's just, I had my mom put me in school and I was in high school. So I did all that. Let's not have my mom coming after me now. But Whew, Jian, I need to sign up for some liability insurance on this show.
I mean, I love how you've been like banned from the Highline, like you've been you kicked out of performance spaces, but you're worried about whether you get the date right on this this podcast. I love it. Please correct me where you can.
Make it make sense, right?
Yes.
So here's the thing. I was a late bloomer. I was a really for me in my home, like anything that was sexually related, like even I guess in a heterosexual way was just really there was a lot of shame, and my mom really had an issue with being comfortable with intimacy and I guess having children who had hit puberty. She made it very strange for us. My sister wasn't allowed to even shave her legs until she was 14 or 15. She hear my mom was just really weird in that way. And there was a lot of shame about being a normal teenager who had and then you throw in my queerness on top of it, which even took it deeper. So I was a late bloomer because of all these things, and I had really hard times with intimacy, with people being attracted to me. It made me very uncomfortable. I think I was even more uncomfortable with being attracted to people. I didn't really know how to process those feelings in a normal way. But let me say this, please, 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 for the audience, do not confuse that or any of my story with who I am, because what I really is my pet peeve and what is really harmful to queer people is when people try to say, oh, well, this went wrong and that's why you are the way you are. We're a product of something that is negative. So let's just be very clear about that. I've met queer people who come from amazing families, normal, great, healthy backgrounds. So let's not connect those dots. So to answer your question, yes, I assumed that I was gay because I'd never been with anyone before. I'd never kissed anyone before. I didn't. There was no other options except gay and straight, And for me, there wasn't a lot of education with someone sitting down and having conversations with me. And when it came to any type of queerness or homosexuality, it was something that you would hide, that you would be ashamed of. I had a cousin around me who was extremely... Now, here's the interesting thing about me is, I can make myself look more femme or more soft, but as far as my mannerisms and my voice, I'm not someone who's extremely would be clocked as being gay growing up, And I had a cousin who was older than me that was extremely effeminate naturally and extremely, stereotypically gay acting, who was trying to, I guess, not embrace that part of themselves. And he had a horrible time. I mean, he was just the butt of all jokes. And that was very difficult too, amongst Iranian people that I grew up with, just seeing them making fun of somebody that I cared about. So once this whole thing happened, for me, that was the only option. It's not even that I wasn't unsure. It's just there was no other option. I was like, you were just gay. That was it.
And how does your mom react?
Well, I mean, my mom and my sister were following me around. They were playing freaking Inspector Gadget, And then when we started, so my mom and sister confronted me about it. My mom did, and they said to me that you have an option. Either you stop, and I don't know what it means to stop being yourself, but you stop,
right.
Or you leave the house. And I left. I left, and I never turned back.
You got kicked out, basically.
That's how I have said it for a long time. My mom's not comfortable with me saying that. She says that she didn't mean it, that it was more it was supposed to be a disciplinary bluff to kind of, she didn't really think I was going to leave. That's how she says it now. But as far as I'm concerned, yes, I was kicked out. That's how it felt to me.
You didn't feel accepted, at least. Is that fair?
I also was ridiculed and embarrassed at the same time, because my mom, I never even told her, I didn't get a chance to have this, most people get to come out and have these things. They just stalked me, and they made it very uncomfortable. It wasn't just about my sexuality at this point. It was a violation of my privacy. It was a violation of so many things. And the funny thing is, it became even hurtful when I later found out that my sister, who was a part of the storyline, was a lesbian who was hiding.
Right.
So that even was more of a mindfuck.
Wow. Safe to say it wasn't a "this is us" moment where the family holds hands and says, "Thank you, honey, for being so honest. We love you no matter what you are." That didn't happen in your case.
No, but what Persian family does that happen in?
Well, that
Oh, چقدر خوشگلم عباس کیوان آره ببین کیوان گی هست وای ماشاءالله دن 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 دن. I mean, give me a
cue
fucking
the
break. Where
music.
does that happen?
Right, cue the Andy. Okay, so then you end up, but here's an interesting twist. You end up moving to New York. You see if I've got my information right here. You end up moving to New York with this man, and you realize that you're attracted to men and women, all kinds of different folks, and you end up actually falling in love with a woman, and you have a relationship with a woman, but you don't tell your Persian mom in this case. And that's curious to me. It seems counterintuitive. Why wouldn't you want to tell her? Wouldn't that be emancipating for her somehow?
Yeah. I mean, most people would think I would like want my mom to know. I think for me, it was a lot of, because keep in mind, I was just such a late bloomer. I didn't really have a lot of chances to establish who I was. So I'd established this narrative where I really thought, okay, this is who I am. And then, when my ex and I were like on the rocks, it's funny because I told him that I had an attraction that I was curious about, but I wasn't really sure about it. Because here's the thing, when I'm in a relationship, I'm in a relationship. Like, I love you. You're the apple of my eye. Like, it's about you. So I'm not trying to find out all this stuff about myself right now because I'm in love with somebody and I'm young. This is my first love. I'm not trying to explore, that's what you do when you're in your 50s and everything's downhill. That's when you start okay. I'm making a joke. People say all the swinger stories when people are the relationships dried up and it's gone sour. Right. This is fresh, this is puppy love. And when things started to come to an end, I took full liberty to really explore and find myself. I hoed around and I'm proud of it. I mean, everybody should find themselves. There's nothing wrong with dating and finding out what you're attracted to. For some people it's easier because they had an opportunity to in their teens, but I really didn't. So my ex, not the one that I started out with but before I was with Anna, I dated a girl for a year and I was me, full makeup, everything. We had a really great time, and I hid it from my mom for a while because I just felt like I wanted this to be mine. And the moment my mom found out that I did something she liked, it's she owned it and took it away from me. It wasn't mine anymore. And I think that's a Persian mom thing. It's you go to school for them, you become a doctor for them, you have children for them, you live for them, you probably die for them. I mean, they probably made a pact with God and they're collecting your ashes at the end of the day. Who knows? It's there's this sense of entitlement that comes with being a Persian parent that is culturally ingrained in the culture. And I think it was that left that resentment where I just did not want to tell my mom anything that she was going to be happy with.
There's an element of the public and the private when it comes to Iranians especially that is germane to this when it comes to your mother, because is it true that your mom, after some time, what she was actually taking umbrage with, what she was most worried about or offended by was your makeup, your presentation, your clothing, the way you were strutting around, rather than whether you were gay or straight or non-binary, which is quite revealing, isn't it? Tell me a little bit about that.
It's funny because my mom had a really hard time with my parents, and to the point where she told me just leave the town, you're embarrassing me, just get out of here, leave the town, not even my house anymore, just leave the town. It's she kicked me out of Wilmington.
You mean the Hollywood of the South?
I guess my mom's the fucking Hollywood sign, I don't know, but she kicked me out. But it's funny, when I started dating Anna, who is my wife and the mother of my children. Now, Anna's interesting because, Anna is a very unique person and she's always been attracted to people like David Bowie, and she was goth when I met her. She came from she was attracted to a culture where men had more of a Renaissance, vibe where men did everything, and I think coming from a scene where musicians and stuff like that, it's different because I throw a lot of events and there's straight guys who come in eyeliner, guy liner, and looks and stuff, and it's it's kind of you're not really going around, oh, let me guess what your vibe is because you're dressed this way. There's more openness, it's more fluid. So she was always attracted to that. So she loved the fact that I was always dressing the way I was. So when I met her, actually, it just got elevated. I started wearing more makeup. I started to really play with femininity and because for the first time, I was with a partner who really embraced that. My first partner, the guy that I was with, he hated the fact that I wore makeup. And that's interesting because in gay culture, there is a lot of heteronormativity and a lot of bashing against femininity amongst other gay men. And you see that in lesbian culture too, where there is a lot of backlash in certain scenes against females who may be masculine. Now there are gay people who are attracted to that, but for the heteronormativity can be a really toxic thing in gay culture.
So we were talking about how your mom had more issue with the way you look than with what you might be doing in private.
Because she wants, for her, like, she's coming, she's like, خب مردم gay هستن دیگه نمیگن صاحب نمیکنه با مردم دیگه تو خونه خودشون. Like, for me, my mom saw me as I am as a fetish. Like, she thought this was bedroom behavior. And that was just really hard for me to understand because I'm like, this objectification of queer people is just so damaging.
Right. I understand.
And that's what we do as humans when we don't understand something. We objectify it.
But the reason I ask is because, or want to harp on this to a certain extent, is because there seems to be different levels in the Persian community. I mean, we can't speak of this in universal or omnibus terms. I'm not. So if anybody takes issue with this, it's like I'm just talking about some folks. But there's the one level where, and maybe this is like the sort of state level in Iran, where homosexuality should not exist, or it's a bad thing, or it's something that we should demonize, or it's antithetical to Islam or whatever. And then there's this other level, which it feels like a lot of people operate at, which is, all right, you know what? Do whatever the fuck you want, but make sure you never tell anybody or make it public or, because it's taboo. And that's the part where I feel like we need a corrective, in the Persian community. And by the way, it doesn't just exist around gender orientation or sexuality. It exists around, all kinds of things. I mean, that we're very private people when it comes to what we do in our homes, and that can be quite destructive in some cases, I think.
Totally. I think some of the things that make us great are the things that are our downfalls. I mean, self-perseverance and knowing how to act is a great thing that Persian culture has. They really, are socially graceful people, and they really know how to be considerate, and they're really much great when it comes to their image, with how they're perceived, and that creates a lot of success. But there's a price that's paid for that when it's brought over to, having to deny who you are, and I think that's where it's gone overboard. And as far as Iran, the interesting thing is that Iran has the second highest transgender population in the world.
Yeah.
And the problem with Iran's mentality when it comes to queerness and gay people isn't even just an acceptance at this point. It's false narratives and creating an explanation that is not true to where the people have come to believe it. A lot of people in Iranian culture have thought that I was trans because, I have like long hair or makeup, or I might look pretty at times. And that's kind of how the government acts. The famous quote, "We don't have a gay problem," because Iranian government believes that it's not a gay issue, that it's a trans issue. That if you're not a gay person, that you're a trans person who hasn't transformed, who hasn't gone through your transition. And therefore the government helps support you, have this transition. And actually you're pressured by your family in some ways to do so. And then what happens is you're a gay guy or girl who is just a gay guy or girl. Your sexuality and your gender are two different things, but you're having to change your whole body and go through this whole process that is put upon you just to try to survive. And then what happens is they end up in prostitution or they end up killing themselves. So many of them. It's great for people who are actually trans, but that's the country that we're coming from. So I always have to remind myself when it comes to my mom, when it comes to my family, okay, well, this is what the status quo is. Over here, it's like we might think something messed up, but at least there's some decency to correct us from a larger platform. The government there just really has a lot of misunderstanding that is very damaging towards queer people. And that's the problem, is that my mom still to this day doesn't fully understand it. I mean, she loves me. I'm her son. She loves her daughter. But I think there's a lot of pieces to this pie. There's not understanding. there's not being comfortable with being able to express who she is, with being a woman, who's had multiple partners, who's been married several times, all the shame she's dealt with that. So I think there's a lot of pieces to this pie that's created this cultural tone to where you can say this is a Persian trait.
Kayvon, you've said you like the word queer. I want to quote you saying, "Queer is freedom. It's openness. It's real." And I think that's what we want from society. We don't want to play dress up anymore. We don't want appropriation. We want the real deal. Can you explain that? What is the real deal, and what does it mean to not want to play dress up anymore?
Well, I'll say this. For me, like, my queerness it's just the freedom, it's being able to be myself and not have to dress like a dude because that's like more masculine, because that's what's accepted for me today. Or if someone says, okay, well, you're feminine, so you should be trans, you should just go that direct. Like, I want to just stay where I am. Like, I pull from both sides of my gender expression. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's honesty, that's freedom, that's queerness. Queerness derives from a state of not understanding, like to be called queer was not a positive thing, decades ago, so that's kind of the derivative of that word, is this kind of bizarre berserk, not really being able to understand. Queerness it's a space where I can exist, I mean, how can I make sense of it? I mean, maybe somebody who isn't Christian, who isn't Muslim, who isn't Jewish, who maybe believes in all sorts of faiths, who might celebrate Christmas but also celebrate, Passover. I mean, like, just being able to be in your own truth and not having to be strictly like one thing. I think that's where queer people feel like they can just really be themselves, is where these judgments, these expectations aren't put upon you because people just perceive you. And that expectation and judgment has even grown stronger being that I'm a parent, because I have people write me, like Iranian people especially, like خدا رو مرگم بده بچه‌ت نیار جلو مردم اینجوری, or like چرا خودت جلو بچه‌ت اینجوری لباس میپوشی. It's like people then assume, oh, like you're messed up, so now you're messing up your children because you're being yourself. God forbid.
I want to get to your kids and how that's how having kids has changed your life. But when did you know that your life is really meant to be lived as a performer and an artist, that you want to take this big personality and perform? Was that always there? I mean, I heard somewhere you did pre-med. You actually tried to the path of being a doctor for a while and realized that just isn't you. When did you know that this is who you have to be?
Yeah, I think looking back, like, I clearly was always a performer. There's this video that like haunts me that I never want to come to light, of me, like, okay, Chuck E. Cheese used to be called Showbiz Pizza, and like there used to be this big gorilla that used to like sing with the keyboard, and it was a birthday party, and I'm like, do you remember that song, I'm your Venus, I'm your fire, it's your desire?
Yeah, it's called Venus.
So I'm like voguing and like tearing it, like breaking down, and like this, having this spiritual like awakening in front of like all these, and like it's funny, the VHS is just going around, everyone's just kind of like, and I'm just like literally feeling myself more than anybody. And it's weird because my mom's like really encouraging me. She's like, whoa, you can hear she's living for it. So I think that's one of the things I do love about Persian culture, is that we do love like dancing and music and performing. But it's funny though, that's another thing that's meant for the house. Like, just like you keep that at home. That's not something you pursue. That's shameful.
Right.
That's something that's not understood. I mean, one of my good friends is an attorney, and she became an attorney later in life, and she was actually an attorney for Viacom, like MTV and all this stuff. And her family like literally didn't understand what she was doing. Like, how do you not understand what she's doing? She's an attorney. Like, isn't that like good enough? But no, because she like worked for like Viacom. I mean, so if they're having shit, like what do I expect? Some
yes,
like slack?
Absolutely. But I mean, how far can you describe? Like, I've watched videos of you. I follow you on Instagram. But I mean, what is it that you, when you were at the the apex of your shock rock live shows and wild performances. When you get banned from the Highline Ballroom, for example, in New York City, what is it that you were doing?
It's not what I was doing. See, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, this is the issue I have with like media, is that there's elements of truth, and then like there's the elements of like what makes great headlines, you know, and there's like the in between.
Okay.
So, you know, the truth is, I mean, I hate telling that story in this conversation because I feel like we've had, oh Lord.
Why do you hate it? Don't tell me the story. Tell me why you hate telling the story.
I don't hate telling the story. I hate like having to like have somebody, the fear of somebody listening to this and be like, okay, so he's just inappropriate. He doesn't know how to act. And then that becoming an excuse for them to dislike my queerness and you know, like I hate that like thing.
But that's what you've chosen. That's what you do. I mean, you're a big personality.
Right. I'm not saying that it's a feeling that's justified or healthy, but it's a feeling that's there at times. And like, you know, we're having these great conversations. So do I really want to like put myself in a position where like I'm telling this story that's completely going to just be like, what the fuck? But it's a part of my life. So anyhow, I'm
you don't have to. You don't have to tell the story. I mean, I'm curious what it is that, I mean, you seem like a very, I just don't know what are we talking about here? What is a shock rock live show? Just give me. You don't have to tell that story, but why are you considered so wild?
Here's the thing. It's called shock rock for a reason. Now, keep in mind, this is like over a decade ago. Like I'm not where I'm at in my life. I definitely was still coming out of a place in my life where, you know, I was not coming from the greatest mindset. Mm-hmm. So certain things I look back and I'm proud of and I stand by. Certain things, you know, I'm like, would I do them same again? Probably, but what are you going to do? Like become like a non-binary pop star? Like that didn't exist back then. So like this was a world where I could really just kind of be accepted, you know, acts like Marilyn Manson, David Bowie, like those types, you know, like that's a great space for people who, I mean, I consider David Bowie to be a queer person, you know?
Sure.
And those are great places for people like us to exist because there's the freedom, there's the fluidity. So the scene was attracted to me and I was attracted to it. Now going back to the performances and things like this, like the performance that you were referencing, what happened was the venue, and I'm gonna explain the story because now someone's gonna nosy ass to go Google it. I mean, these are Fuzouks, these are Iranians. They're gonna want to know what the hell we're talking about. So basically, what happened was I had performed this amazing live show. I'd put a lot of effort into it, and yeah, there were dark elements. There was like theatrical elements. There was a vaudeville element. You know, there were some gothic elements, new wave. You know, and half of the audience may not know what that is. Go Google that, but. Putting all that aside, like, yeah, it was a show that I put a lot of effort into. So I get there and the venue says to me, oh, you can't have fire breathers. Like, and I had hired these people. We had already negotiated. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is, I've already worked this into my set. Like I'm relying on this. Like, no, you can't have that. And then there was some like fake blood that we were doing some like, you know, like gothy stuff with. Like, oh, you can't use that either. It's gonna make the stage dirty. So at this point, I'm like, okay, make the stage dirty. You're basically being an asshole to me. Like, you know, I get it. Like, and at this time, I hadn't have any press. So I was just like somebody who was just getting started. So I'm like, okay, I'm like that fucking asshole who like is gonna be like told that I have to like stand in the back of the line for my own show, basically. I mean, if you're a performer and you're starting out, you do the music scene, you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. They were being assholes. So the fire performers, like this really weird couple that, you know. It's really their fault. So they said to me, they're like, well, what are we going to do now? And I made a joke. I said, well, why don't you guys just go fuck on stage? Like, just do something. Like, it was a joke. So literally, okay. I noticed as I'm performing, like, everyone's just, like, gasping. And I'm like, they're not gasping at me. Like, they're gasping at what's going behind me. So I turn around, and these two are, like, going at it on the freaking stage. So, of course, like, what am I going to do? Like, say, stop. Like, I just have to, like, keep singing and, like, and I'm like trying to like get this song over with, like, because, you know, they're also not very attractive people to be doing this act. But
okay.
Yeah, so basically a woman was following me who was a writer for Page Six, and someone had posted something on my page about it, and next day the headlines were performer has sex on stage, which never happened. I never had sex with anybody on stage. I've never had sex with anybody on a stage. I definitely didn't suffer because of that. It kind of was a note, like bad press is good press thing. Like I really got a lot of attention because of it, and it helped me in some ways, but it never happened. It was a sensationalized quote, which technically happened, but technically didn't happen. So take what you will with that.
And you, I mean, that's not that bad. It's not that big a deal.
I mean, but like for you, it's that bad. But what about somebody listening from home?
They excommunicated you a long time ago. They haven't made it this far into the conversation.
Right. Okay.
No, I kid. I hope they have actually. Just out of curiosity, I mean, the sort of hesitancy you had with telling that story. Are you hesitant because you know there's a lot of Iranians listening?
No, it's because I don't want to add to the narrative that like queer people are like perverted or like something like that. We're like, you know, like
I see that it's necessarily because you're queer,
right? I don't. It's not pesare kharabe. That's what I've always
right. Which is
that's what I don't want to feed into.
Right, you as an artist has nothing to do with your. Yeah, we can establish
but like
that.
You know, and the thing is like that's what it is. It's like I don't want to feed into that stereotype because that's damaging.
And you know what? You're not. I'm doing that. And the reason I'm doing that is because we have this dual kind of focus in this interview where we want to hear your story, but we're also asking you about homophobia in the Persian community. So it's going to get a little gaudy, and that's the, you know, but at times, you know, you've also been a wild personality. I
have been. And, you know, I own it. Listen, I'm not like ashamed of it. And it's not about like being Iranian. Like I said, it's interesting because in our culture, we don't have a lot of people who are out. Like growing up, you know, you had like Khordadian who was like dancing around and like Queen Gal, and like I knew I'm watching a queer person and I loved it, but like he never would speak on it. I don't know if he's even come out to this day. But like with that said, it's like there's so much lack of representation. So for me to be somebody who's always been out and loud, you know, I just want to make sure that my narrative isn't adding any harm. So like that's my sensitivity, but you're absolutely right. Like my queerness who I am has nothing to do with me as a performer.
So let me ask you, I mean, you're in a great position to be able to assess this, especially now as you have a growing audience amongst Iranians as well. And even in Iran, I understand, on your Instagram channel. You know, we know it's not a new narrative to talk about the fact that there's been progress made when it comes to trans or LGBTQ or over the last decade. I mean, as Obama said in 2012, you know, when things were changing around same-sex marriage, you know, I've evolved. It feels like society in the West has evolved. And I wonder what your perspective is on where the Persian community is at and all that. First of all, when you were doing your shock rock stuff, and if you take us back a decade ago, how open were you about your Persian background through all of that? And when did Iranian sites start to get to know you, and what would they say at that time about you?
I'm glad you mentioned that. There was this site called MTV Egi, which was MTV, and it was also MTV World. And they were one of after the Page 6 stuff, they started to feature me all over their website. My music videos, press about me, things about me being Iranian, you know, and now it's a defunct website. It's a branch of MTV that's no longer there, but I have to give credit where credit is due. They really, really were progressive for the time. And my Irani Bourdain was the clickbait for them, even though it wasn't really clickbait, but it was a narrative that they really spoke about. I've always been very open about my culture. A lot of the imagery and, you know, the Persian, like the big eyebrows I do, like it comes from like looking at the Persian miniature paintings, you know. And then my name is fucking Kayvon. I mean, what more can I do? Just wear a shirt that says I'm Irani. But still to this point, even now, people still are so shocked that I'm Persian. And it's like, I don't know what to do about it. I mean, I wanted to be a part of the narrative, but you know, I think between my features and also between my presentation, how I express myself, I think, and my openness on top of that, and being an openly queer person, I think that's just a recipe for not being the typical Persian person. So it's hard for people to accept that even if I look Persian to somebody, they'll be like, well, that's not a Persian thing to do. A Persian person would never embrace this type of thing, you know?
But to the point I was trying to make, have you seen a change, an evolution in how the Persian community reacts over the last decade or in your lifetime?
More so in the last year.
In the last year?
Yeah.
What's happened in the last year for you?
Somebody at some TV stations were like, خب آزاده جان ببین این آمریکا دارن همین حرفا نان باینری LGBT چیه دیگه ما دیگه بیاریم رو برنامه‌مون. I mean, I think it's like it's become a little bit more socially acceptable in the Western world with, you know, all the queerness and representation. So they want to seem like they're hip. I mean, do I think it's 100% authentic? No, but I'm not going to say it's an Iranian thing. I think it's not 100% authentic with the Western world either, with the movie boxes, with all these shows. Listen, I'll take any step forward, even if it's like a shady step, you know? Like, do I think that Pride has become the new Christmas where they're just making money? Do I think people who are selling Pride merchandising are necessarily really advocates for LGBTQIA rights? No, I think it's become commercialism. It's become more marketable. So I think there are some people who are hearts are in the right place, but I think there's a good population of people in the entertainment world and the media where it's just something that's going to be views and equate money for them.
But do you think that homophobia is somewhat still acceptable in some Persian circles in a way that it isn't in some other cultures?
I mean, here's the thing. Like, homophobia is everywhere. Racism is everywhere. Prejudice is everywhere. But sticking to the point of homophobia and transphobia and all these things, the issue with Iran is that the government, I think if the government were to put their foot down and say this is wrong, that gay people are not trans people, that we do not allow harming our queer family members like Ali Reza, you know, in Iran, who was executed by his own family just because he was gay. Did you hear about the story? I'm sure you have.
Of course, yeah.
You know, so like, why hasn't the government spoken against that? Like, if that happened in the West, you know, even crusty ass Trump would have said something along the facts that this is not acceptable, and he's a piece of shit. But I mean, you know, it's like our piece of shit would even speak against it. But that's the issue. That's the issue.
But do you think that, I mean, if Iranians at a bar in Toronto or New York or LA are making queer jokes, that's because of the government in Iran?
It's not about the homophobia. It's about the, like, you know, all this khijalat bazi. Let's have a little bit of khijalat about it. If our government and our parents are telling us this is wrong, even if we feel this way, at least we don't have the balls to do it. You know, like I can't change people's genuine core. You know, I can't go around and say, oh, well, you know, this is how you should feel or think because the way you're thinking is shitty. But at least if it's not socially acceptable, then it helps. You know, that's the problem. We can't go around changing people, but we need to fucking, like, instead of policing people about wearing a hijab and shit, let's police people about fucking homophobia.
Right. And it does help. It has changed. For example, in the United States, when the legislation came down, say on same-sex marriage, now a majority of Americans believe in same-sex marriage. It can lead the way.
It starts from the top.
It can.
It works its way down.
Let me end off. I thank you so much for the time and the candor. Let me end off with a couple of questions about family. I said I'd come back to it. How you have 3 kids now? How has having kids affected you, or maybe changed you?
When you have children, you know, you definitely, a part of your brain just really changes. I think having been somebody who didn't have kids, you know, it was, your mind is set up just to really protect yourself, to think about yourself. I think once you have children, it's like you're not just here anymore. There's parts of you that are outside of your body. You think about, you know, how did you grow up? Like, how did your parents act in certain situations? It's been a blessing and a curse at the same time. I mean, being a parent has been a wonderful experience, and I love having children. I have a 4-year-old daughter, I have a 2-year-old son, and an 8-year-old boy. And it's really been a rewarding experience. It's the most meaningful thing I've ever done. It's going to be, my legacy will be being a father, and that'll be it. But the hurtful thing and the hard thing about it has been comparing my childhood to how I'm raising my children. And that's been very difficult for me. I didn't think it was going to have this, you know, reverse psychology effect where I was going to really start building resentment towards, you know, my upbringing, because I'll be like, why didn't, you know, my parent talk to me like that or do this for me or take me there? I think that's been the hard thing about it.
You've said recently that you tried to reach out to your father and your half siblings, but you were turned away. And you said it's probably one of the most hurtful things you've had to deal with. Why do you think they turned you away?
It's such a complicated situation. My parents hid basically my identity. They pretended like I wasn't my dad's son, and I had to be around this guy growing up and know that he was my dad and just play this game of like, orphan. And when I finally mustered the courage to reach out, I knew I was going to get married. I knew I wanted to have kids, and I said, listen, like, I want to move on, put this behind me, and I just really need some answers. And before I have children, I need to heal and put this chapter to an end. And I can't say I really got that result from it, unfortunately, but I basically was able to convince him to do the DNA test, only because I threatened to reach my half siblings. I don't think he would have done it otherwise. And from there, I've heard that he's just decided that because he didn't raise me, that I'm not his son. And he told me that when we met. He's like, I didn't raise you. Like, I can be your friend, but I can't be your father. When you have your own kids, you'll understand that. Yeah, I think it's a very hurtful thing for somebody who kind of recognizes that already, but that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear like, hey, like, you're my son. Like, I know we can't change the past, but let's try to have a relationship from here on out. Like, I think that's what I wanted. I knew that things going to be changed. I think to have the half siblings say they didn't want anything to do with me was definitely like the nail in the coffin. It's like, it was just very clear that he was right. I'm not his son, because if I had 3 half siblings come to me saying they were my sibling, I wouldn't turn them away. So obviously I'm not your son, because I would never act like that. So he was right. I'm not his son, because I would never act like that.
A final question, which is around the kind of feedback you've been getting from Iranians and young Iranians, especially, even some in Iran. You've mentioned David Bowie a few times through this interview, happens to be my idol, and who I've written about, always saying that he taught me when I was a kid and when I was feeling like an outsider that it's okay to be different. It's okay to be unique. I mean, he basically says it in his music, and long before Lady Gaga did.
Yeah.
I know you get some messages from kids or from young people in Iran and around the world saying that you provide some inspiration for them. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really great. I think the internet has created this portal where we can kind of all coexist in like this diaspora, where we're like kind of not just, we're not geographically on the same wavelength, but, electronically we can kind of live in this world where we can kind of coexist. And that's been great, because so many Iranian kids and adults and have just reached out and said, you've been like a breath of fresh air. To see somebody like you has been great. I think also, as some of the shallow things about who I am, like the aesthetic, maybe some of the cool things I've gotten to do, or the fun glamorous stuff, or the press coverage, I think kind of is a good thing, because they kind of feel like, hey, like, this isn't somebody who was just like thrown to the street, had wasn't able to create any opportunities for themselves because of who they were. I think that helps too, especially in the Iranian world, because so much of what we're told as kids is like, your family's not going to love you, you're never going to be able to get anywhere, you're going to like never have a job, like all this stuff. So I think for people to see that I have a family, that that I have my own career, that I have my own life, I think that probably gives some people some hope that they can also be themselves and just have a decent life.
How's your relationship with mom these days?
I will always love my mom, and I know my mom loves me. I think we have a lot of work to do. I'm wanting to do the work. I just don't know if she's able to. I mean, unfortunately, she would have to do a lot of changing. I think for a Persian woman, a Persian mom to change is like impossible. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the ways that have been ingrained in her head, she'll never be able to have the relationship that she wants with her son and daughter. I think my sister's a lesbian. I'm a queer person. You can't. She would have a great relationship with us if we were just regular, hetero people who happen to be doctors and happen to have a boy and a girl and lived in a certain house and all these things. If we were her idea of perfection, I think we'd have a great relationship. But unfortunately, I'm not, because people aren't perfect and people are individuals. Not everyone's the same. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I wanted to do the work. I mean, even with my dad, I would love to have a relationship with my dad. Even after everything, I would, in a heartbeat, if it came to me, I would say, I will, like, even the past few years with all this shit, I'll let it go. Like, all good. But I just think I'm too open and I'm too real to have a relationship in an Iranian family.
Kayvon, thank you so much for this today. I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate the insights and the story and the candor.
Thank you so much for having me.
See you soon. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Kayvon Zand, a nightlife performer, musician, actor. You can find Kayvon at Kayvon Zand on Instagram. Kayvon Zand, Kayvon Zand. Kayvon joined us from Jersey City, New Jersey today. Microphone's back on for Captain Reza and Groovy Shaya. How was that?
Could you start?
Yeah, I can actually. So many things to say.
Shaya was just exhaling.
He's taking it in.
It's so exhausting to be asked a question.
The thing is that I wanted to say something, but it's most related to myself, what I've learned from his interviews.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
So I rather to Reza speak about the interview.
Okay, go ahead, Reza. Speak about the interview.
I don't know if I learned anything for myself personally, but I definitely, it definitely affected me emotionally. When he was talking about his father, and wow. You know what I wonder if
what part of what
when he was saying that now he knows not to approach his dad anymore. That's essentially that's a CLDL. He's like, I want to do that anymore. But what I wanted to ask him from like an actor's perspective, if he uses his background, uses his person, his relationship, what he's gone through, his emotions, his thoughts, if he draws from that in his performances. That would be because if so,
you mean taps into the emotions of
the
difficulty of
his that rejection and going through all that. Because I think
what would that tell you if the answer was yes?
Then I want to see where he's playing, like what theater, which Broadway, and I'm gonna go see that show because that performance would be, I don't know, marvelous. I think.
Kayvon's got a new. Kayvon's band has a new video coming out soon, so there's performances to be seen, Captain Reza. No. But now that I know you have conditions, I need to know.
If you're a method actor, I only watch you.
If he studied the Stanislavski method actor, I'd be happy to watch his show.
Otherwise, not too sure.
I found it really. There's so much I was so interested to hear from Kayvon in that interview. One of the things that Kayvon was saying early on about that people would mistake Kayvon for being a white person.
Yeah.
I mean, the skin is quite white, and that yet Kayvon would say, I'm Iranian. Wouldn't embrace that white privilege as Kayvon was putting it. I think that's
That's
very interesting
That's
because in my case I would have
fascinating.
opted to be seen as a white person.
So would I.
Yeah.
And we've had people, like I've had my friends who are like, they're look more Persian than my dad. Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they
yeah.
like, oh no, my name is Mark. I'm from
Yeah,
Italy.
yeah.
And it's
They look like they came from Qazvin.
I was like,
I don't know where that
no.
is. Just Shia says that. It's funny.
No, but that's fascinating that
Yeah.
he opt to basically embrace his background,
Yeah.
ethnicity. That's interesting.
All right, Shia, what's your personal story? We're waiting.
Come on,
Okay,
baby.
yeah.
Come on, baby.
The thing is that you have to be your first actor of your own movie. I mean, your life is like a movie, and you have to be.
You're the star of your own
Yeah,
movie.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, and the way that Kayvon lived, he lived as a star of his movie, which I'm struggling hard to can be the star of my movie, you know.
So you don't think you're the lead of your own life? You think you're
No, no.
Really?
Who is the lead in your life then?
That's
My surrounding.
Oh.
Not only one. Yeah, a lot of time I sacrificed myself to please my surrounding, to just not. But who cares? I have to be my own star.
Why
of
did you learn
my
that from
show.
Kayvon as opposed to any of the rest of
Because
our guests?
he always push boundaries to be a star for
Right. So,
himself.
you say to own it.
to own
To own
it,
it,
yeah,
yeah,
to
yeah.
own himself. And now he's calm, he's at peace, and because he fight for
Mhm,
that.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, in this interview, Kayvon was calm and at peace. I mean, everybody
Uh-huh.
has their ups and downs.
Yes.
I'm sure that
But it did
no
feel
one is
like that.
immune to that. But
he's
but
a serene
such
person.
perspective, yeah. Like
Yeah.
Kayvon's obviously come to a place where they've got the
Totally.
So, yeah.
Totally. And on that note, Shia is leaving the studio, I guess. No, I'm joking. He's not. Trying to find himself.
That's funny because in my movie, Shia,
Uh-huh.
you're the star.
Aww.
So
Now I'm living
everything revolves around you, and then I'm just a bit player in the movie.
Yeah,
Oh
right.
my God, I'm living this.
Hey, once again, a big thank you to Farid Emerion and York National Realty for helping out with this episode. York National Realty is a boutique real estate company based in Aurora, Ontario, Canada. Top tier service from Farid and his team of Sean Fadavi and Nahol Sultani. And Farid, this is a full service realty firm that are there for everyone from first time home buyers to investors looking for new opportunities in communities they serve. And they're also proud supporters of the LGBTQ community. They wanted to support this show with Kayvon. Thank you to Farid, Sean, and Nahol at York National Realty. Go to yorknational.com. yorknational.com. All right.
All right.
This is full time for Roqe for today. Back next week. Dr. Sheila Nazarian, Ali Parsa, Tara Tiba, Hamid Saidi, just some of the guests coming up on Roqe in the coming days. For all Roqe information, and including information about how you can support us and become a patron of our program, roqemedia.com is where all of our episodes and our guests reside. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together, the fabulous Keon, Super Patty Saw, Thoughtful Nagin, Pods of the Artist, Producer Susan, Savvy Roham, Alay Mehrdad, Sponsorship Sean, Captain Reza and Groovy Shy. And thank you to all of you out there supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Mizun Bashi.